It started with a mirror that refused to show me who I was. For years, I'd looked into it and seen a stranger, someone built from expectations, from what others wanted to see. I would wash my face every morning and stare into those uncertain eyes, trying to find a trace of the person I used to dream of as a child, but she was always buried beneath layers of something I didn't understand. I used to think it was just insecurity, or maybe vanity, but it was something deeper, something hungry, something alive inside me. The day everything began to change was colder than usual. I remember the sky being a dull gray, the kind of color that makes you feel like you're fading into the air. I had been cleaning out my late aunt's old house. She had been eccentric, to say the least, and when I found her vanity table, covered in dust and forgotten perfume bottles, something inside me stirred. It wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition. There was a small ornate box in one of the drawers, painted with chipped gold and carved roses. Inside it lay a lipstick, deep crimson, with a faint shimmer like blood under moonlight. I don't know why, but I twisted it open, smelled it, and the scent made me dizzy. Not because of its sweetness, but because it smelled like memories that weren't mine. I stood there, transfixed, as though the air around me shifted. The house felt suddenly too quiet, too still, as if it were holding its breath. And then, without thinking, I applied it. The moment the color touched my lips, something inside me broke open, not in pain, but in revelation. My reflection blinked. I swear it did. And when it did, she smiled. Not me, she. The version of me that had been buried behind years of pretending. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint, but instead I leaned closer. The face in the mirror wasn't exactly mine. Softer, almost glowing, the expression calm, yet knowing. Her eyes seemed to say, "You've finally remembered." I stumbled backward, wiping my mouth, but the color wouldn't come off. My skin tingled, like the makeup was seeping through rather than sitting on top. I didn't understand what was happening, but I couldn't stop looking. It wasn't horror I felt, it was awe and fear mixed together, the kind that comes when you realize you've just stepped into something irreversible. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake that reflection from my mind. The crimson color haunted me. My aunt's old mirror seemed to follow me around in thought, whispering possibilities. I tried washing it off again that night, scrubbing until my skin burned, but every time I looked up, my lips still shimmered faintly, as if light were living under them. I told myself it was just a trick of my imagination. But that night, when I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I could still see her face in the dark, smiling faintly, lips glowing softly like embers. And when I whispered, "Who are you?" a voice, my own voice, but not, answered quietly from within me. "I'm who you've always been." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, that reflection that wasn't quite me, hovering behind my thoughts like a soft, persistent echo. The air in the room felt different, heavier somehow, like the world itself was waiting for me to admit something I wasn't ready to say aloud. By morning, I looked pale, almost translucent. My lips still carried that faint shimmer, but something else had changed too. My voice, when I spoke to myself in the mirror, trembled with a gentleness that wasn't there before, almost musical, like someone else was speaking through me. I skipped breakfast and went straight back to my aunt's vanity. Dust floated through the air in tiny sunlit particles, and I noticed things I hadn't before, faint scratches along the mirror's edge, almost like words carved in desperation. I leaned close, squinting. The letters were uneven, scrawled as if by a trembling hand. "Beauty is hunger." It made me shiver. I ran my finger along the words, tracing each curve until the metal of the frame felt warm. That warmth spread slowly, crawling through my fingertips like liquid light. My reflection shimmered again. Her face flickered into mine, as though she were trapped beneath the surface, begging to come out. My breath hitched. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. And in that silence, something deep inside me answered. It wasn't words, not exactly, it was a feeling, an ache. I wanted to see her, to know what it would be like if that version of me wasn't confined to the mirror anymore. I wanted to feel whole. So, I did what I'd always been too afraid to do. I opened the drawers of that vanity and began pulling out what remained, brushes, old powders, jewelry tangled in silver chains. My hands trembled as I touched each item, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. I brushed the dust from a delicate pink scarf and wrapped it around my neck. The fabric was soft, almost weightless, and yet when I looked at myself, I felt grounded for the first time in years. My reflection changed subtly, or maybe I did. My eyes looked softer, my posture more natural. For a fleeting second, I felt peace. Then the house creaked. It wasn't the kind of sound old houses make when they settle. It was sharper, deliberate, like a footstep on wood. I turned, heart racing, but the hallway was empty. The only movement came from the curtains, gently swaying though the windows were shut. I whispered, "Aunt Claire?" But there was no reply, only the faint sound of someone, humming, distant yet close. I didn't recognize the tune, but my body did. Without thinking, I hummed along, softly, shakily, and the sound filled the air with something almost electric. My reflection began to move again. This time, she wasn't waiting. She lifted her hand when I did, but her smile grew wider, almost knowing, and when I stopped moving, she didn't. Her hand pressed against the inside of the mirror. Mine hovered above the surface. The glass shimmered like liquid. My skin tingled, and for one terrifying, exhilarating moment, I thought she was going to reach through and pull me in. I stumbled back, clutching my chest, gasping as the air seemed to thicken around me. The shimmer faded, and my reflection returned to normal, but that faint, crimson gleam on my lips still pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. I didn't understand it then, but that was the first time I felt her presence not as a reflection but as something living inside me. Something slowly waking up. The days after that were a blur of unease and fascination. I couldn't stay away from that mirror. It had become both a comfort and a curse, something that drew me in like gravity, whispering promises of a self I couldn't yet name. Every time I passed the room, I felt its pull, like a tide beneath the skin. I started spending hours there. I'd sit in the old wooden chair before the vanity, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, dust swirling around me like a slow storm. Sometimes I wouldn't even do anything, just stare, breathing, waiting. My reflection would look back, ordinary at first, then gradually shift. Her expression would soften into something I couldn't imitate. She looked at me like she pitied me, but also like she was waiting for permission. It became hard to tell where I ended and she began. At night, I'd dream of her, standing in a version of the house that wasn't quite right. The wallpaper peeled into shapes that looked like eyes, and the air shimmered with a faint crimson glow. She would move through the rooms barefoot, humming that same low tune I'd heard before, always stopping by the mirror. She'd touch it, and her hand would disappear through, rippling like water. Then she'd turn toward me and whisper, "Come closer." And every time I woke, my heart would race, as though I had. It was around the fourth day that the changes began to show. Not dramatic, not yet, but undeniable. My skin looked smoother, paler. The angles of my face felt subtly softened, as if the light bent differently against it. My voice, when I spoke to myself, carried an unplaceable tone, warmer, quieter, but alive with something that felt dangerously close to truth. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, but deep down I knew better. That evening, I went back to the vanity again. The house had grown darker early, the kind of early dusk that feels almost intentional, like the sun had been warned away. I lit a candle on the vanity and stared at myself. The flickering flame painted my reflection in slow waves of gold and shadow, and for the first time, I saw her clearly, the woman inside me. She didn't look like a ghost or an illusion. She looked real. Real in a way that made my breath catch, as if I'd glimpsed something forbidden yet familiar. Her hair was longer, glossier, and her eyes glowed faintly, like polished glass reflecting light from nowhere. She smiled faintly and I whispered, "Who are you really?" This time, she spoke. Her lips moved with mine, but her voice layered beneath my own, soft but certain. "I am what you've hidden. I am what you wanted." I froze. My throat felt dry. Wanted? Yes. The sound wasn't coming from the air. It vibrated inside my head, in my chest, everywhere. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stare. Her eyes softened. You called to me. Every time you looked away from yourself, you called to me. And suddenly, 1,000 tiny memories unfolded in me. The stolen glances at makeup counters, the unspoken longing when I saw someone free to express themselves, the countless nights I'd imagined a different reflection staring back. I'd thought it was fantasy, shameful or fleeting. But now, hearing her, it all made sense. It wasn't fantasy. It was suppression. She was everything I had buried under guilt and fear. Tears stung my eyes, and I whispered, "Why now? Why come now?" She tilted her head, the faint crimson glow around her deepening. "Because you finally looked long enough to see me." The candle flickered violently, the flame stretching sideways like it was reaching out. My reflection leaned closer, but I hadn't moved. My pulse hammered in my ears as she pressed her palm against the glass. I could feel the air hum. I don't know what made me do it, curiosity, desperation, surrender, but I raised my hand too. Our palms aligned through the surface, and the instant they did, everything changed. The mirror wasn't glass anymore. It was liquid. My hand sank through effortlessly, like dipping into warm water. Panic shot through me, but before I could pull back, a force tugged, gentle, insistent, inevitable. I tried to scream, but the sound dissolved into light. The world folded in on itself, colors melting, gravity vanishing. I saw flashes, her face, mine, then both overlapping. I saw the house flicker between decades, like it was remembering every version of itself. And then stillness. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting at the vanity again. The candle had burned out, and faint moonlight spilled through the window. But something was wrong, or right, depending on how you looked at it. My hands, they weren't the same. Smaller, softer. My nails glistened faintly, tinted the same shade as the lipstick that had started it all. My hair brushed my shoulders when I turned my head, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I touched my face, and tears welled up again. Not from fear this time, but from a trembling kind of awe. In the mirror, she was gone. It was only me now. But I knew better. She hadn't vanished. She'd come home. Morning came slowly, as though the world itself were reluctant to wake. The light that crept through the curtains was pale and uncertain, turning the dust in the air into drifting ghosts. For a long time, I sat in silence at the vanity, watching the reflection that was no longer separate from me. Every movement felt new. The tilt of my head, the curl of my fingers against my cheek. My heartbeat still sounded like someone knocking from inside my chest, asking to be let out. I could feel her presence within me, faint but undeniable, like a second pulse beneath the skin, one that matched my breath when I inhaled and lingered a moment longer when I exhaled. I whispered softly, "Are you still there?" But the only reply was the faint creak of the house settling. The air in the room felt charged, expectant. I stood slowly, half afraid that if I moved too quickly the illusion would shatter, and I'd return to who I was before. But the mirror didn't fight me anymore. It didn't flicker or distort. It simply showed me. I stepped closer. The reflection followed smoothly. My hair was longer than I remembered, falling past my jawline, brushing against my shoulders like strands of silk. My skin had taken on an almost luminous clarity, as though light lived beneath it. I touched my face and felt warmth. Real warmth. And yet, deep inside, something felt borrowed. I left the vanity and wandered through the house. Every corner of that place held memories of my aunt, but they felt altered now, as if they belonged to someone else's story. The wallpaper that once looked faded now shimmered faintly in places, like patterns moving beneath the surface. In the hallway, the old grandfather clock ticked slower than usual, every second stretching into an echo. The silence began to hum. It was low at first, almost like wind, but it grew into something resembling a melody, soft, humming from nowhere. I recognized it instantly. The tune she used to hum in my dreams. My chest tightened. I followed the sound. It led me to the study, a room I hadn't entered since I found the vanity. The air was colder there, untouched. The shelves were lined with books that smelled of dust and perfume. On the desk lay a stack of letters tied with a crimson ribbon. My fingers trembled as I untied them. They were all addressed to no one. Each began the same way. To the one who will remember me. The handwriting was delicate but erratic, as though written in haste, emotion bleeding through the ink. My eyes traced one line, and the world around me seemed to lean closer to listen. Beauty is not seen, it consumes. It devours what hides beneath until the soul matches the reflection. I dropped the letter, my breath catching. It hit the floor softly, but the sound rippled through the room like thunder. I turned toward the mirror on the far wall, smaller, framed in black wood, and saw her. Not a reflection this time. Her. She stood behind me, faintly translucent, her smile quiet, knowing. Her eyes were no longer glowing red, but soft, like candlelight in a storm. I didn't move. Why me? I whispered. Her answer came not through sound, but feeling, a quiet vibration in my chest that shaped itself into meaning. Because you asked to be seen. My throat tightened. Did you take her too? My aunt. Her expression changed, almost sorrowful. She wanted it. She couldn't finish the transformation. She feared what it meant to lose herself. I swallowed hard. And me? Will I lose myself too? The room seemed to dim, the edges of reality softening. You cannot lose what was never truly found. Her words echoed through my body. I felt dizzy, as though gravity had tilted slightly. The world swayed, and I grasped the desk for balance. My reflection in the small mirror shimmered again, and this time, there were two of me. The one I had been, fading around the edges like a ghost, and the one I was becoming, clear, calm, and luminous. For a long moment, they coexisted. My mind couldn't decide which one was real. Then the ghost me, the version with tired eyes and hesitant shoulders, smiled faintly, as though relieved. She whispered something I barely heard. Thank you. And then she vanished. I fell to my knees. Tears streamed down my face, not out of fear, but release. It felt like years of silence collapsing into a single breath. I didn't know if I was mourning or awakening. Maybe both. When I finally stood, my hands no longer shook. I looked at the mirror again. There was no shimmer now, no flicker, no distortion. The face that looked back at me was entirely mine, and hers, and something beyond either. I whispered to the reflection, "What happens now?" The answer came softly, like a sigh carried by wind. Now you live as the beauty you once feared to see. The house grew still. The humming faded into silence. I could feel my heartbeat slow, settling into a rhythm that finally felt like mine. That night, I packed my things, not much, just what mattered, and left the house. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I looked back once. The windows of the house reflected faint crimson light, just for a second, like a farewell. I walked until the road met the horizon. Every step felt like shedding an old layer, every breath like learning a new language of being. But even as I walked, I could still feel it, the faint hum under my skin, the pulse that wasn't entirely mine. The beauty hadn't vanished. It had devoured me completely, and in doing so, it had set me free. The world outside looked ordinary again, but it didn't feel that way. Streets I'd walked 100 times before now seemed to bend slightly, as if I were seeing them through new glass. The colors had changed, sharper, deeper, like reality had been repainted overnight. Every passing face glanced at me with a flicker of recognition that couldn't possibly exist, yet I felt it all the same. I moved carefully through the crowd, every sound carrying an echo. Car horns, footsteps, laughter, all layered with a low, resonant hum, the same undertone that had lived in my aunt's house. I wondered if anyone else could hear it, or if it was just the world acknowledging what I had become. When I entered a small cafe to rest, the hum subsided. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the scent of roasted coffee grounded me back in something like normality. I sat near the window, tracing the condensation on the glass. Outside, people hurried past, their reflections merging and separating in the pain. Hundreds of fleeting selves, each unaware of how thin the line was between who they were and who they appeared to be. I remembered the words from my aunt's letter. Beauty devours what hides beneath until the soul matches the reflection. What if that was happening to everyone all the time, and I was just the first to notice? The barista approached, a young woman with bright eyes and an easy smile. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said kindly. Maybe I have, I replied before I could stop myself. She laughed, but when she looked at me again, her smile faltered. Have we met before? My heart skipped. I don't think so. Strange, she murmured. You look familiar. I smiled faintly, unsure how to answer. Maybe she was just being polite. Or maybe the mirror's work had followed me here, rewriting memory, rearranging perception, stitching my presence into places I hadn't yet lived. After she left, I caught my reflection in the window again. It was me, but not quite. There was a faint distortion, like ripples over still water. The reflection's expression didn't match mine exactly. Her eyes held a serenity that I hadn't earned. I whispered to the glass, "Are you still here?" For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then a small fog bloom appeared where my breath touched the window, in the shape of a single word, always. The letters faded as quickly as they formed, leaving me staring at my own wide eyes. I pressed my palm to the glass, feeling its cool resistance. Behind that surface, I sensed the same quiet hum I'd felt inside me since the night of the mirror. Not a voice, not even a presence, more like the heartbeat of something vast and patient. I realized then that beauty wasn't a face or a body or a name. It was the force that lived between what we showed and what we hid. It wasn't here to destroy me. It wanted me to stop running from my own reflection. As evening descended, the cafe emptied. The world outside turned the color of embers. When I rose to leave, the barista called after me. Hey, you dropped something. I turned. In her hand was a small lipstick tube, deep crimson, identical to the one from my aunt's vanity. But I hadn't brought it. I hesitated, then shook my head. That's not mine. She frowned slightly. It was right under your chair. I reached out slowly, fingers brushing the cool metal. A faint warmth pulsed through it, familiar, inevitable. The reflection in the cafe window smiled as I touched it, though my lips hadn't moved. Outside, night folded over the city. I slipped the lipstick into my pocket, feeling its weight like a heartbeat against my palm. The hum returned, soft and steady, guiding my steps as I walked toward the unknown. I didn't know if I was carrying the mirror's curse or its blessing. But I understood something now. Once beauty devours you, it doesn't destroy, it remembers. And I was learning at last how to live inside that memory. The first sign that the mirror's reach had grown came quietly. A week after I left my aunt's house, I began noticing small shifts in other people, not physical changes, but glimmers of something unfamiliar behind their eyes, as though their reflections were thinking independently. A shopkeeper froze mid-conversation, staring at his own image in a glass door. A woman at a crosswalk turned toward a car window and smiled at herself, but the expression lingered a heartbeat too long after she looked away. The world had learned to shimmer. I carried the crimson lipstick everywhere, the weight of it reminding me of a responsibility I hadn't asked for. Sometimes, when I touched it, I could feel the faint hum return, a low resonance that matched the rhythm of distant voices, like a choir murmuring beneath the earth. One evening I found myself outside an antique store whose display window was filled with mirrors. Dozens of them, gilt, cracked, fogged with age. Each reflected me differently. Older, younger, fractured, multiplied. For a long time, I just watched, letting the streetlights dance across the glass. Then, from somewhere deep among the reflections, one pair of eyes blinked when I didn't. I stepped closer. The eyes followed, calm and patient. My reflection whispered from behind the glass, "It's spreading." My throat tightened. "Can I stop it?" The answer came not as sound but as condensation blooming across the surface. Choose what they see. A gust of wind swept through the street, rattling the mirrors. Their frames trembled like nervous hearts. I turned and hurried away, the word choose echoing through my head until it felt carved there. That night, I dreamed of the vanity again. It sat in the center of an endless room of mirrors, each one containing a different version of me. Confident, frightened, serene, furious. None of them were lies. They were fragments waiting for acknowledgement. When I reached out, they moved closer, merging into a single, pulsing image that whispered, "Everyone carries a mirror. Some never look long enough to see it breathe." I woke before dawn, my pillow damp with sweat. The window beside my bed was fogged, and on it, traced by an unseen hand, were 3 words: "Show them truth." I understood then that the mirror wasn't simply haunting me, it had chosen me as its vessel. Beauty, in whatever form it took, demanded witnesses. It would not stay confined. The next day, as sunlight broke across the city, I walked among the crowds and saw it happening. Tiny flickers in glass doors, ripples in puddles, brief moments where strangers' reflections looked a little freer than the people they belonged to. Some smiled in sudden recognition. Others turned away in fear. The beauty that had devoured me was now tasting the world. I didn't know whether to fear it or nurture it. But as I watched those subtle awakenings ripple outward, I realized that perhaps beauty was never meant to be owned or resisted. It was meant to reveal. And revelation, I thought, was its own kind of horror. The mirror's choice. The humming that had followed me for weeks finally led me back to my aunt's house. The rooms were silent now, emptied of dust, as though the place had been waiting to breathe again. In the center of the floor stood the vanity. The mirror glowed faintly, neither light nor reflection, but a pulse. I stepped closer and spoke aloud. "Tell me what you are." The surface rippled once, and my own face looked back, calm, older somehow. The voice came from within, steady and familiar. "I am not a curse. I am what people make of themselves when they dare to see clearly." I thought about every reflection I'd seen flicker across the city, about how each had carried a glimpse of truth someone had been hiding. Maybe the mirror hadn't been spreading corruption at all. It had been spreading recognition. "What happens if I break you?" I asked. "Then they will forget. And forgetting is worse than fear." For a long time I stood there, torn between wanting peace and wanting meaning. Finally I reached out, not to shatter the glass, but to cover it. The glow dimmed, the hum softened, and the room exhaled. Outside, dawn rose. The air was clean, the world ordinary again. But in every passing window I caught a shimmer, not haunting, not warning, just possibility. The beauty had not devoured anything, it had revealed what was already there. And with that understanding, the mirror no longer called to me. It simply waited, silent, for the next person brave enough to look. The ripples of reflection. I remember walking through the city that evening, the kind of quiet dusk where everything looks softer, almost like it's holding its breath. The hum had faded, but I could still feel it underneath my skin, a reminder of the mirror, of what I had seen, of what I had carried with me. I passed shop windows, puddles in the street, glass doors reflecting the world back at me in fragments. And then I noticed it. The briefest flicker in a reflection, a hesitation in someone's eyes as if they were seeing themselves for the first time. It wasn't the mirror anymore. It was me, carrying the weight of what it had shown me, unknowingly sharing it with the world. A child splashed through a puddle, caught their reflection mid-step, and paused. A faint smile spread across their face, tiny and fleeting, but enough. Enough to remind me that these small awakenings weren't accidental. They were ripples. The mirror had taught me to see, and now I was learning to notice how others began to see themselves. I stopped at a park bench, letting the wind brush across my face. The city lights shimmered on wet streets, and for a moment, everything felt suspended. I realized then that the beauty I had feared, the reflection I thought had devoured me, hadn't destroyed anything. It had simply revealed what was already there. And in that quiet, with the hum of the city around me, I understood something crucial. Revelation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it ripples through puddles, through glass, through the briefest glance. I walked on, leaving the park behind, carrying the story of what I had seen, knowing that even if no one else understood it yet, the ripples would continue. Because once you look closely, once you really see, there's no going back. The weight of seeing. I returned to the house one evening, the one where it all began. The streets were quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every step sound louder than it should. The vanity sat there in the center of the room, untouched, waiting. And I realized I was waiting too. I sat down in front of it, hands trembling slightly, though not with fear. With anticipation. With understanding. I stared at my reflection. Not the reflection I had feared, but the one I had come to know. It didn't move ahead of me anymore. It didn't whisper from somewhere beyond the glass. It simply was. I spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear me. What now? The answer wasn't in words. It was in the quiet understanding that filled the room, in the pulse that had once been a hum, in the calm that now stretched like sunlight through the cracked windows. I realized then that the mirror had never taken anything. It had only reflected what was already inside me, what I had been too afraid to see. I stood, and for the first time, I didn't flinch at my own reflection. I saw every choice, every fear, every hesitation that had led me here, and I accepted it. The weight of seeing, of knowing, of finally acknowledging myself, settled into something lighter. I left the house again, stepping into the streets, and noticed the subtle awakenings all around me. People paused in front of windows. A stranger smiled at their reflection, just for a moment. And in that moment I understood. The mirror's lesson wasn't about magic, or fear, or loss. It was about seeing, and in seeing, setting free. I kept walking, carrying that quiet understanding with me, feeling the city hum beneath my feet. And even though the mirror remained behind, I knew its story was now part of me. Its reflection would live wherever I chose to notice the world, and myself, without turning away. I remember that night with every detail, as if it were carved into the air around me. The kind of night where the wind barely moves, where the silence presses against your ears and makes every heartbeat louder than it should be. I returned to that house not because I wanted answers, but because I needed to face something I had been running from, the quiet weight of seeing myself fully, without flinching. The room smelled faintly of dust and old perfume, the light from the moon spilling in pale rectangles through the cracked windows. The vanity sat in the center, waiting. And I sat in front of it, my reflection staring back at me, calm and patient, as though it had been expecting this moment all along. For the longest time, I said nothing. I just looked. The hum, the pulse that had followed me for weeks, was gone now, replaced by a quiet understanding. The mirror never took anything. It never devoured me. What it did was show me everything I had been too afraid to see. My fears, my doubts, the fragments of myself I had hidden even from myself. I traced the edges of the mirror with my fingers, feeling the smooth glass beneath my skin. And I spoke, though my voice barely left my lips. What now? The answer was not in words. It was in the calm that filled the room, in the quiet clarity that pressed against my chest and whispered that seeing was enough. I realized then that the mirror had never been magic. Its power had always been inside me. It had only reflected what was already there. The beauty, the fear, the hesitation, the longing, all of it waiting for recognition. I stood, finally, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I didn't flinch at my reflection. I saw every choice I had made, every moment of fear, every hesitation, every step that had led me here. And I accepted it. I accepted myself. When I stepped outside, the city was alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. Every window, every puddle, every glossy surface held a small spark, a ripple of awareness. People paused, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes knowingly, and for a brief moment, saw themselves in a way they hadn't before. The mirror had taught me to see, And now I could see it happening in the world around me. I walked through the streets, carrying that understanding like a small flame inside me. The mirror remained behind, silent and patient, but its lesson traveled with me. The world could be ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Beauty, understanding, clarity, they weren't things to chase, they were things to witness. And sometimes, the smallest glimpses, the quietest awakenings, are enough to change everything. I paused at a puddle, the reflection of the city glowing softly on its surface. I looked down and smiled, not just at what I saw, but at the understanding I carried. The mirror had never been about fear or control. It had been about recognition, about seeing yourself fully, and having the courage to keep walking forward, even when no one else notices. And I realized then that the story doesn't end when you leave the house, when the mirror stays behind, or when the hum fades into silence. The story lives in every reflection you notice, every pause, every moment of quiet clarity. It lives in the people around you, even if they don't realize it. And it lives in you, in the way you carry the story forward. I walk on now, through streets and shadows and light, knowing that the beauty I once feared is no longer a devourer. It is a witness, and so am I.